All right, we are at 7:31, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us this morning for Coffee with Corn, brought to you by the Corn Marketing Program of Michigan. If we haven't met, my name is Angel Genio. I am the Communications Director here at Michigan Corn, and we're joined today by Josh Linville from StoneX. And before we jump into your presentation, just a couple of housekeeping bits for the folks on the call. We'll have a segment for questions and answers at the end of the presentation, but anytime that you have a question, you can click that Q&A button across the bottom of your webinar screen and type that in. You can do that at any time. You don't have to wait till the end. So if you want to make sure your question's at the top of the list, type it in as soon as it comes to mind, and we'll get to some of those at the end. Um, Josh, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself and your background?
Sure. Yeah, grew up on a family farm in Northwest Missouri. We did mostly a row crop, had a little bit of a few head of cattle, did tobacco, and went to the University of Missouri with every intention in the world of getting the heck out of ag. I grew up with it. I was going to go do investment banking and stuff like that, chase the money. And as agriculture seems to do, it always pulls us back in. So graduated, started in the fertilizer the absolute next day. That was back in 2022 or 2020, 2002. My gosh, it's been a long time. Um, and I've been here ever since. And the position I'm in now kind of puts it in a unique spot. No longer in a supply as far as physical or anything like that. So I can talk about the market without any sort of fear of repercussion or angry, suppliers or anything like that. I can just talk about this, and frankly, if I upset the status quo, so be it. And that's really what we've been trying to do, is trying to lift the veil on this information. I know one of the reasons I got into fertilizer, and frankly, coming back from Australia, the reason I took this role is knowing that for most farmers, fertilizer is the biggest input per acre. And frankly speaking, you talk to most farmers and say, well, what do you know about fertilizer? And nothing is the nice answer. You get one a little riled up, they'll have a few more explanation words in there to describe how little they know about the biggest input, and that's not okay. That's not all right. We've got to have a better idea of what's going on. So now trying to kind of provide that information, what's going on, and frankly speaking, with every product out there, it's a world situation. It is not a backdoor. It is not just a U.S. centric situation. It starts with the world and it builds its way down to where we are. So knowing what that is incredibly important. And let's face it, farm economics suck. They are not great, especially this year. So every little step, every little penny counts. And if we can get ahead of some of these fertilizer moves, cool. That's what I'm here for.
Well, we're looking forward to your insight on this topic. There's certainly a lot going on and a lot to be concerned about. You should be able to share your screen if you want to pop your presentation up, and we'll just jump right into it.
All right. That, and that. Are you able to see that okay?
There it is. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, good deal. So the one thing I haven't had time to update this PowerPoint slide deck with is all the tariff situations with Canada. Actually, I was in Canada all of last week. Stayed with all the heightened tension and everything. I made sure not to wear the red hat or anything like that up there, but it's such a fresh thing. It's such a new thing. I haven't had a chance to really put slides together with it. But let's talk through the points really, really quickly. I know I've only got about 30, 40 minutes here, so we're going to speed through a lot of this stuff. If you need these slide decks, I'll send this over to her. She can send this out to you. But the biggest conversations being had is surrounding potash. And boy, you listen to some of the pundits up in Canada and like, oh, our biggest trump card on this whole situation is potash. They can't live without our potash. Yes and no. So number one, the biggest thing that helped us is the fact that they delayed the tariffs 30 days to start with. That was 30 days that the market was able to sit there and pound the heck out of the market on getting tons across the border. So that doesn't mean that every single ton that we need for spring season is across the border and in place, but a lot of it is. So this tariff situation is not going to be a major, major impact. Number two, when you look at the price of potash, it's decent. I know a lot of people look at it and say, gosh, dang it, Linville, nothing's decent. Equipment stinks and that stinks and all that. I get where you're coming from, and I'm not trying to say anything is cheap per se, but when we look at the price of potash, it fell from its early 2022 highs. It dropped down to very attractive levels, and it stayed there. Nitrogen went down and went back up. Phosphate never really went down. It's continued to stay high. Potash is the one that has remained relatively good value. If there is a single input for farmers in the US that could handle a 25% tariff, it's potash. So, fortunately, quote unquote, fortunately, the one product that they seem to have leverage over us is the cheapest product that's out there. The one product where a 25% duty rate doesn't mean nearly as much. I mean, imagine a 25% duty rate on phosphate. That would be devastating. And that's what they're having to deal with. But they're focused on the potash because so much flows across the potash across the border, and they're saying things like 90% of the U.S. Imports come from Canada. They have to have our stuff. That number is right, but dig a little deeper. Like anything, there are facts and there's damn facts. In this situation, the fact is 90% of our 14.9 million tons that were imported last year came from Canada, 12.9 million ton. But they use the US to export their products. Of that 12.9 million ton that comes into the US, about 7 million tons of that goes into terminals in Portland and Snake River to be exported around the world. So all of a sudden, that 12.9 isn't 12.9. Reduce another 7 million tons out of that. And we're looking at a situation where, frankly speaking, our demand in the US is about 4.9 million tons per year. And we still bring in 2 million ton a year from other parts around the world, mainly from Russia and Israel. And people have gotten fired up when I talk about that, like, oh, you guys buy from Russia, blah, 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 blah. It's like, we've been doing it this entire time. This is not a new situation. This is not a change of strategy or anything like that. We have been buying from Russia this entire time. They have been our second biggest potash importer. They are their biggest provider of urea and our biggest single provider of UAN. So it's not changing a single thing that we have been doing for years, whether you're a Biden fan or you're a Trump fan. But the fact that we have spring needs already in place means that we have time. Precious, precious time. We now, if we assume we've got most everything in place for spring, we've now got 7 months to look and prepare for the next fall season. And we don't have to go in the fall in a lot of places. A lot of places can sit there and say, listen, if I don't get it in the fall, I'll go next spring. And now all of a sudden you're talking a full year before we get to that point. So all of this to sit there and say, I don't think that the Canadians have quite the stranglehold on us on potash as they think they do. It is incredibly important. And I am not trying to downplay that. I am not trying to pick sides in this thing because I'm trying really hard to stay unemotional in this whole situation. And I'm not trying to look at it from a US perspective, Canada perspective. I'm just trying to look at it from a farming perspective. I think that, yes, Canada potash is incredibly important, but I think the US has a lot more options out there. They can look at bringing more from Russia, from Israel, from all these places around the world. And we've got 3 different coasts that we can bring stuff into. When you look at Canada, they can bring a lot of product into the East Coast, but they really struggle to move stuff east-west. Guys, we've got the West Coast, we've got the Gulf Coast, and we've got the East Coast, and we've got rail capacity at all 3 of those places. We've got more options than what a lot of the world thinks that we do, not to mention the river systems and things like that. One thing that hasn't been talked enough about is what it looks like if the Canadians put revenge tariffs on the US. They are almost solely relying, except for some East Coast places, they're almost solely relying on the US for their phosphate. And right now in the Gulf of Mexico, a phosphate barge will trade or cost a little over $600 a ton. But if we just assume $600 and a 25% duty just on that FOB price, it's $150 short ton USD on top of a price that's already incredibly high priced. That's the thing that's going to hurt. So if Canada comes in with just widespread 25%, we're just going to hurt you everywhere. We're not going to pull out anything. I dare say the Canadian farmer will hurt worse in the situation just because of that rate on the phosphate. I'm not saying that helps offset anything that we're going to deal with here in the US for potash, but it's just a situation of the whole deal. So it's ongoing. I keep hoping I wake up. I mean, every single morning since this has happened, I wake up, I flip over, I turn off my phone, and I check the news, hoping that this thing has been put to bed and we can put it behind us. Neither side of the border wants this because at the end of the day, this tariff thing does not hurt the Canadian government. It does not hurt the US government. It hurts farmers on both sides. And that is crap. As always, the little person is the one that ends up going to fight the war. And that's where this thing is. Let's go ahead and get into all the other stuff. That aside, and I can answer all the questions, everything like that if anybody has it. But nitrogen, people are asking, why are nitrogen prices so high? My grain prices stink. My fertilizer prices are high. Why is nitrogen so high? It's global supply issues, guys. Plain and simple. Number one, the biggest thing that we've been dealing with in the last year or so, a little over a year, the Chinese government continues to restrict exports. Now, normally they would export about 5 to 5.5 million ton, which is what this blue bar over here on the right-hand side shows. That's the 3-year average going back to 2019 through 21, their last normal period. And their exports have fluctuated the last couple of years as since late 21, 22, when global values started to skyrocket, inventories got tight, and the Chinese government got very protectionism, I guess is the right word I'm trying to think of. They start to look at it and say, listen, and I'm kind of putting words in their mouth, but if I'm China, I'm looking at the situation saying, okay, we are communists. What is the greatest danger to communism? It's not an outside party. It's your own people. It's an uprising. You don't want your people to get upset. And what's the biggest voting bloc? What's the biggest block of people in China? They're farmers. So if you want to keep a large chunk of your farmers happy, and you are traditionally an exporter of urea, if you want to keep supplies high and prices low, stop exports. It's exactly what they did. The average is about 5 to 5.5 million ton. 2024, they exported 262,000. Now, from a Chinese farmer's perspective, it was a great strategy. My prices did stay low versus the world. My supplies were plentiful. I could find it anywhere I wanted. Unfortunately, for the rest of the world, that strategy worked. And the government's sitting there saying, holy crap, this is great news. Our farmers are on the front foot. Their inputs are very, very cheap. And so we haven't been seeing them export. Now, there's been a lot of rumors that have popped up. Oh, they're coming back here and there and everywhere. Nobody knows. It's China. If anybody sits there and says, I know what's going on in China, no, they don't. Typically speaking, very few people in China know what's happening. And everybody else lines up and says, if you tell me to do this, I will do it. Thank you, sir. Now, they will try and get around the different things, but it's China. You don't go against what you're told. So we don't know what's going to go on. We do believe that they will have to come back eventually. We know that through some reports and different things like that we have seen, their stockpiles are incredibly high. So they either have to lower their production rate or they have to start exporting again. But we don't think they're going to allow that to happen with their spring season right in front of them. That would be crazy to sit there and keep the price down so long, and then right before it's time to put it on, release it and let prices jump. So we do believe China's going to come back later on this year, but I don't think it'll be in time for our spring season. Number two, of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues to play. This is a massive anhydrous. Now, when you look at urea, they have continued to export heavier amounts than normal. UAN has been heavy exports. Phosphate has been heavy exports. Potash has been heavy exports. But anhydrous, not so much. Anhydrous is the one thing that hurt them. And so when you look at this as a map of Ukraine, and what they would do is they'd produce product in Russia and they would ship it through this pipeline, very similar to this pipeline we have in the US that runs across the Eastern Corn Belt. And they would ship it through the east, southeast, and south of Ukraine down to ports down around the Odessa region, fill up vessels and send them out to sea. And for years and years and years, this thing worked fine. No problem. You never thought about it. How many tons do you think Ukraine allowed them to ship after they invaded them? They shut it down. There was damage up here on the eastern side of the pipeline because this thing is shallow enough or sitting on top of soil that when the fighting was going on, it was just an innocent bystander. And then you think about the damage to the infrastructure, the electrical grid. Guys, this pipeline is not short. This is not a mile or two long pipeline. This thing has got a lot of length to it. You have to have pump station. Without electricity, your pump stations don't work. Without your pump stations, even if Ukraine was sitting there saying, Russia, you can ship through this pipeline, you can't keep the flow moving. So Russia has gone from the largest anhydrous exporter in the world with about 4 million ton per year to nothing. They didn't have another option. And they continue to work on it. They're working on these facilities up in Ust-Luga and down Taman, with Taman looking like it's going to be online here fairly soon. But since they started this invasion back in 2022, our biggest exporter and provider of anhydrous supply has just not existed. They're off the charts. They are gone from the top 10 list. Now, The world is getting excited about Taman. We're seeing some weakness on global prices because Taman's coming. That's going to start exporting some tons. It might not be 4 million ton, but it's going to be something. That's going to be the return of the biggest supplier. Unfortunately, if this fighting continues, Taman is very close to Crimea, and we've been seeing. You remember the bridge between Crimea and Russia, where they launched a missile attack to blow up the bridge? Taman is very well within that wheelhouse of them being able to attack. It is not outside their reach. Um, hopefully, and when I say this, I'm saying this from a strict fertilizer standpoint. Hopefully, these plants come online, or better yet, hopefully, we'll see a situation where we can find peace between these two. And part of the peace agreement is that pipeline is repaired, put back into operation, and hydrogen can get back to normal and help lower anhydrous prices around the world. But until then, guys, the world of anhydrous is missing its biggest supplier. That's 4 million tons. It's just not there. Iranian production offline. Now, the Russian situation we expected at the beginning of this year. China's an expectation for this year. Iran was a surprise, and I'm off in my circle by a country. I got to move that over to the right. Just notice that. Um, Iranian production went offline because of gas supply issues. Now, of course, Iran, we know, is a very heavily sanctioned country. Um, and because of that, a lot of their infrastructure has struggled. They've been keeping it online best they can. But we saw a situation here to start 2025 where demand started to spike, temperature's cool. So your people demand rise to heat their homes. And then you got a situation where the infrastructure just struggled to keep up. The why behind it doesn't matter as much as the fact that it happened. In Iran, people like to discount. They like to say, oh, it's Iran. They're heavily sanctioned. People won't do business with them. Their urea is typically a discount because of all the sanctions and the credit risk fear and all this other stuff. They're absolutely right. But at the end of the day, a ton of urea from Iran matters just as much as a ton from all around the world. And we spend a lot of time talking about China and how important they are, and they're the swing supplier, and they're the boogeyman. When they're there, prices go down, and when they're not exporting, the prices go up, and all these other things. China exports 5 to 5.5 million tons per year. Iran exported 4.8 million tons in 2023. They are nearly the exact same size on an export basis as China, one of the biggest boogeymen in the urea marketplace. And yet they get very little credit because of who they are. So Iran has been offline for about 6 weeks. We believe they are coming back online. It's just a matter of, it's not if, it's when. But those are lost weeks of production. And again, 4.8 million ton exported in 2023. 6 weeks of production is about 600,000 tons of production that's gone. We don't make that up. That's when you're looking at all these supply issues that we've got going on. That's just more tons removed. That helps support global prices because the S&D got tighter. One more thing, just to point this out, and I show this graph or this map a lot, but I just talked about Iran and how important they are. But we spend a lot of time talking about the Middle East in general from a nitrogen standpoint. And if you don't recognize this, just to put it in context, you got Israel here in the middle. To the west, you got North Africa, you got Algeria, Libya, Egypt, and over here in the east, you got the Middle East. And you've got the transportation issues we've had in the Red Sea because of some attacks. That has gone away largely. But this hurt this waterway. And of course, the ship just said, fine, we'll just go to the south. But guys, this map represents 1 out of every 2 tons of urea that's exported around the world. That's why we spend so much time talking about it. And to dig it even further, the Persian Gulf over here, you see the Strait of Hormuz that's circled. Well, remember back during the Iraq War, Desert Storm, Desert Freedom, all that stuff. The talk of the world was, boy, Iraq, if they start attacking ships in the Persian Gulf, think about what that's going to do to things. Look at what that's going to do to ships and rates, and are they going to be able to ship and all this other stuff. Well, look at how incredibly small their footprint is on the Persian Gulf. They are very easy to hem in because they just don't own a lot of oceanfront property here. But if all of a sudden Iran started to get a little lippy and started getting into more of a fight, and we've been worried about that when they got in a fight with Israel and they were launching missiles back and forth, and the structure of Iran, obviously the Western world isn't happy with them. If Iran finally said, you know what, screw you guys, I'm going to start attacking ships in the Persian Gulf, look at how easy that is for them. They control the entirety of the north and eastern side of the Persian Gulf. They almost envelop all of the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow waterway right here. It was not easy to ensure safe passage through the Persian Gulf during the Gulf War. Imagine what it would be if a fight with Iran popped up. It would be that much more difficult. Look at the millions upon millions of tons of urea that are exported from that body of water. So, just as I'm on the Middle East topic, that's just something to consider. When you see me talking, you're seeing other people talking about the Middle East and fighting flaring up, and they start to talk about nitrogen. This is why. This is why this will never be something we don't watch, because this area has not been fighting for years. They have been fighting for millennia. This goes back generations. We don't understand fighting like they have in this part of the world. It is a natural part of their being. So, because of that importance, because of that reliance, we have to keep an importance on the Middle East. Now, Europe, production continues to suffer. This is another byproduct of the whole Russia situation. Now, if you remember way back when, in the first term, Trump talked about Europe's reliance on Russia for their gas and how that was dangerous, and the European leaders basically laughed at him. Well, it's not so funny anymore. You remember that Europe and Russia got into it about the Nord Stream pipeline, and it finally culminated with Russia saying, fine, we'll shut the pipeline down. We're done. And they did. And then to punctuate it, somebody went in under the water and blew it up to make sure that even if people wanted to, even if countries in Europe wanted to return normal gas flows, pipeline's blown up. It's leaking. You can't use that thing anymore. We saw European gas values. We watched the Dutch TTF, and those values were historically in single digits, $4 or $5 in MMBTU. August of 21, they spiked to $103 in MMBTU. And what do you think that meant for nitrogen production? They had to shut down. They could not continue to operate at those kind of input values. They're not in the business to lose money, so they shut down. Now, fortunately, since that point, we've seen the free market do what it does best. It pivoted, it shifted, and it started to bring in a lot of this stuff from around the world. But these are more expensive lanes, and we've seen prices, they've gone down as far as $7 in MMBTU last winter, but it wasn't low enough for production to come back online. The last 25% is still offline today. And today it continues to sit around 13, 14. It actually spiked to $17 here recently. Fortunately, we have stabilized Europe. They're producing about 75% of normal, but that leaves 25% that's offline. And guys, when you look at the numbers, urea, 25% of the 15.5 million tons produced around Europe, that's about 3 to 3.5 million tons that's missing. UAN, that's about 2 million tons that is missing. And when you look at that from a global standpoint and you start adding it to the China situation, the Iran situation, all the other things around the world, it keeps more support on the pricing. So all these global situations continue to push it. And a lot of folks will sit there and say, well, Josh, Europe doesn't matter. We can produce everything that we need here. So what our price is on gas is what determines the outcome. Anything else is crap. We don't care about it. And I pushed back very quickly and said that could not be further from the truth. The U.S. imports over 5 million tons of urea a year. We move a lot of UAN in and out. We bring in a lot of anhydrous. We are not self-sufficient, guys. So we are part of this world market. And so you've got to look around the world and say, well, who's the biggest swing producer out there? And so I show them this graph. And this graph, the blue line down here at the bottom is your Henry Hub price. That thing is basically dead. It is flatlined. It doesn't do much. This green line is Europe. This is the line that has gone crazy. This is your spike up to $103 in MMBTU. And it's up and it's down. Unfortunately, it's been down more than up here of late, but it's still historically high. And here's your red line. That is New Orleans, Louisiana urea barge values on a weekly basis. I was not a mathematician in school. I did enough to get by. But I do not have to be a mathematician or a statistician to know where the correlation is. Guys, our urea price here at home and around the world is largely being set by European gas values because European producers are the swing producers. Now, okay, let's look forward. Do we think that Europe ever going to get back to 100% production? I don't think so. I think that a lot of Europe production plants are very, very old, and that puts them at a disadvantage. The political landscape in Europe is one that does not want old school nitrogen production. They want green, they want new, they want sexy, and all this kind of stuff. Old style fertilizer production does not factor into that new world vision. So I am scared that even though we're sitting here saying, boy, if we could just get him back, we get him back. I'm not sure we get him back. They would rather the rest of the world produce it and send it to them than they produce it at home themselves. But we'll see. Things can change very quickly. We've seen obviously the political landscape in the US change quickly. We can see that same thing happen in Europe. So the urea outlook for Dow, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of great news for you. Urea supplies around the world are tight and demand does continue to grow. That's very true here. I can tell you our corn acreage number to start this calendar year was 20 or 92 million. Before my family and I took off for Disney about 10 days into the month, we moved it to 92 and a half and felt pretty good. I wasn't gone a week and we moved it to 93 and we're on the lower side. We're taking a more conservative approach, giving this market time to prove itself. There's a lot of folks saying 94, 95, 96. Your average application rate per acre of corn is 155 pounds of actual nitrogen. So spread that out over millions of acres that are added, and that's a lot of new demand with very little time to prepare for it. And then you look around the world, the Europe, China, Iran situation leaves a gaping hole in global supplies. Every 30 days that these three nations have issues, that's a little over 1 million ton of supply that just goes missing. Demand has remained solid, and time is against us in the northern hemisphere. Prices should remain supported, and we're about to test that. India is about to announce a tender. Actually, before I got on here, I was getting reports from a few people. It sounds like it's imminent. Now, we've heard that before, but it does sound like they are about to announce and say we need to buy it. It's probably going to be about 1.25, 1.5 million tons that they need. That could bring in the Ethiopians who scrapped a tender to sit there and say, oh, if the Indians are doing it, we better do it too. That could cause the Europeans to say, crap, we got to buy, and the North America to say, crap, we got to buy, and Asia to say, crap, we need to buy. My bigger worry today is that we are going to see demand step up, and when it does, it is going to run face first into a tight supply situation, and it turns into a buying war. Now, it'll be short term, right? Because we got summer that's literally just around the corner. But short term, I think it supports price ideas. UAN, and I'm going to say this more from a home situation, from a U.S. North American situation. I cannot understate how tight UAN feels today. When I go and I talk to retailers across the nation, everybody is sitting there telling me, I am struggling to find product that can ship before April. Some people are saying, I can't find product to ship before May. We know we've got global issues. We know Europe is a big loss. That's 2 million ton missing just off the top. But our problem here at home is that across North America, we have had multiple production hiccups, not massive, just small ones. It's not a malicious thing like people like to think that it is. It is merely a product of producing nitrogen. It's a high pressure, high temperature thing. They go down. It's hard on equipment. And we've had a lot of small ones that added up become a relatively large number. The cold snap caused more production to go down. It wasn't a massive thing like what we saw a few years ago, but it did remove more production. And we've seen exports be massive. And then here at home, we've got demand going higher again with those corn acres. My worry is that we are going to see prices remain firm and keep a longer tail than what we would normally see. A lot of people say, well, I'll just wait. Side dress tons, they always come down. I'll wait for that. I still think we will see an opportunity. But number one, how much do prices go up before that? And then number two, even if they come down, will it match where we're at today? And number three, does it need to come down as much as it has in the past if supplies are truly as tight as what they feel today? We do need to watch the U.S.-Russia relationship. It does look like it's in a good place. It looks like Trump is doing everything he can to find peace between Russia and Ukraine. But if we get into a situation where all of a sudden the U.S. puts tariffs on Russia, we cut those supplies coming, and frankly, we lose our only real competition against U.S. manufacturers. So all of this to sit there and say, I think that UAN values are going to hold, if not continue to push higher. They will correct eventually. They can't stay where they're at. But I'm afraid the manufacturers hold too many cards in this poker game that we call spring season. And anhydrous, again, that S&D is very snug. The loss of Russia hurts the global S&D. Here at home, we had a great fall season. We had a late fall season. So we emptied the system. We did it all the way through Christmas, giving us little time to get the system refilled. We've got demand that continues to grow. And we've got a finite amount of time and a finite amount of logistics to move stuff around. Again, the manufacturers control the story. The only surprise on anhydrous for me is that prices haven't gone up yet. I think they're coming very, very soon. Phosphate. I know we're running out of time here, but let's get through this. Phosphate, there's 5 key exporters around the world, guys. It's Morocco, China, or Saudi Arabia, Russia, US. The list falls off significantly past that point. So it's a relatively controlled market because you have to have phosphate rock. If you don't have phosphate rock, you can't produce phosphate. So when we look at it, the story becomes much more condensed. Number one, China. China is historically the world's largest exporter of DAP and MAP. And again, that same export restriction program they've been doing on phosphate. Keeps their values low, it keeps their supplies plentiful, and the rest of the world pays the price. Normally, they're closer to 10 million. That's what they did, I think, back in 21, 22, or I'm sorry, 2021. The 3-year average is actually lower because they had suffered a couple of the years in that 19 to 21 stretch. But let's say 10 million is their average. They only hit 6.6 million ton last year, guys. And it might not seem like a big deal, but 3.5 million tons missing from the global market hurts. Number two, here at home, we continue to block imports, and that is just baffling to me. But you look at it, we had already blocked China during the first Trump administration. We'd already blocked the biggest importer, but we were getting stuff from Morocco, Russia, and we were doing okay. But then all of a sudden, 2020 prices hit their absolute lows. Mosaic called for countervailing duties against Morocco and Russia, and they won that case. And guess what? Those tons stopped coming to the U.S. They are non-existent for the most part by this point. We are almost solely reliant on Saudi Arabia than all the other little parties around the world that produce phosphate. So when you look at it, why are our supplies so tight? Why are we struggling so much to get it? Why are our retailers sitting there complaining about phosphate so much? 3 of the 5 biggest exporters in the world are blocked from coming to the U.S. market. And when you look at the U.S., of course, is one of those number 5. We're relying on our own production. And there's Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the only one left that can come here. We dodged major bullets as far as Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Now, when you remember Helene, early spaghetti models put that thing moving right into Tampa. There were some of them that showed it going directly into here. And that was going to be devastating because there's a lot of phosphate production that sits just outside Tampa. They mine it, manufacture it, they ship it into Tampa Bay, they load vessels, they ship those vessels out to sea. This thing looked like it's going to slam in. Now, from a strict fertilizer standpoint, that storm fortunately went west and to the north. Horrible for the people up there. I'm not sitting there saying that wasn't the case. From a strict phosphate standpoint, we dodged a bullet. That's okay. And then came along Milton. And guys, this thing was taking a direct west to east approach. This thing was coming as a massive monster category 5 before it weakened to category 4 when it hit the more shallow waters. And then as it came to shore, 24 hours in advance, it looked like it was a category 4 and it was going to shove right in here. All of the storm surge, all of the wind, all of the rain. And overnight, this thing shifted 100 miles south to Sarasota. It weakened a little bit, but this shift was the difference between this thing hitting directly and flooding the Tampa area with the mines and production included. And it basically sucking the water out because it went down here to Sarasota and the winds prevailing were to the west. And on the north side, it sucked all these everything out of it. But guys, we did lose production. This is part of the reason why production has suffered in the U.S. is because of these hurricanes. You've got to send your people home. And once the storms pass, they've got to go, clean up their own property, take care of friends and family, do all that stuff, and then finally come back to work. But these 2 storms are the closest I can ever think to our phosphate production being impacted so directly. We dodged a bullet, and I cannot understate how important that was. And then you got India. All the things that have been going on around the world. India is the biggest buyer of phosphate, and their government has been screwing the pooch on this. The way they normally buy it, the government is in charge of the imports. They put together a subsidy program because their farmers never truly see world pricing. They see a flat price, and the government takes care of the rest of it. So importers can continue to do their job. Well, since last summer, they've been behind the times. They're always a step behind the marketplace, and their imports have suffered. 2025, they would normally start with their inventories around 2 million tons. They started pretty close to 1 million ton. And they finally got to the point where this year they pinned a 2.4 million ton supply agreement with Morocco. Now, again, this doesn't do anything to the S&D. We knew India needed to buy it. We knew Morocco was going to sell it. It doesn't change anything. But India went in and said, hey, we'll take 1.6 million ton of DAP. We'll take 800,000 ton of triple superphosphate. And we'll just price it as we go, ship it throughout the entirety of 2025. That locks up sales from Morocco. And if a manufacturer has got a lot of sales already locked up and they know where their tons are going, that makes them comfortable. And if a manufacturer is comfortable, they get confident. If they get confident, they like to keep their prices high. So unfortunately, this is something India's poor play on the phosphate market, not being able to get ahead of it, takes another player off the field. That's even if we get these duties removed from Morocco, Morocco's already got a lot of their stuff locked up. They know where they're going with their tons. So it's another supporting situation. So short term, and I'm going to say this through pre-plan, frankly speaking, we don't have time to make any changes. Our production rates have been poor. Our demand has been big. Our import flows from around the world are very, very limited. Inventories are tight. And frankly speaking, this is not a situation where our price is sky high versus the rest of the world. We are largely in line with other global points. But that, unfortunately, that price around the world is incredibly high. It is high versus historical values. It is high versus grain values. If you are sitting there saying, man, something feels really jacked up about phosphate, you are absolutely correct. But beyond that, once we get past the spring season, once we start getting April, May, and beyond, then I think we'll start to see a little bit of an opportunity for prices to fall. You got a lot of carry costs, you got a lot of angst, you got 7 months between the spring and the fall to get stuff put back into place. I think we'll see an opportunity in the summertime, but as of right now, the market has us backed into a corner. Spring is here and they know it. And then last, same thing. Potash exporters, there are more of them around the world, but it is dominated by Canada. They are a major, major exporter at 20 plus million tons. So when we look around the world, again, this Israel-Hamas war that's been going on, fortunately, it does look like that is coming to an end. It's the conclusion has been a little weird. But when we look at it, the reason why I've been talking about that so much is because Israel's the fourth largest exporter in the world. Yeah, 3.7 million tons is not that big a deal versus other nations, versus Belarus, Russia, Canada, but it means something. So if we can get this piece put together, we can start the rebuilding, get all this nasty history behind us, we can find normalcy again. We can remove some wartime premium. China continues to improve and invest in Laos. Now, China is a massive buyer. They were the second biggest buyer back in 2022. And when you look at it, Laos is not a very big player. They only export like 1.1, 1.2 million ton in 2022, but they've got more capability. So China doesn't like buying tons from the West. They don't like buying tons from Canada. So they can accomplish two goals in investing in Laos. By doing that, they put a lot of money into them, and they can now start buying more potash from neighbors, reduce their reliance on the West. Big win for the communist nation. Number two, they expand their sphere of influence. They now have a massive investment in a country right next door to them. And so they can call on them. They can have a little more sway over what their government does or does not do if they start to get into a fight with the West. So Laos is going to continue to build, and with China going to gobble up a lot of that stuff. And what does that mean for the rest of the world? Well, that's just more supply. Demand doesn't change enough to offset the supply that's out there. So even though these Laos tons will probably never see the light of day from a North America perspective, it adds more supply that helps keep prices low. Belarus, you know that back when this whole war started, well, Belarus was one of the biggest potash exporters in the world. They were much bigger than what they are today. But the problem is they allowed Russia to ship troops through the south of the country and attack Kiev from the north. Moscow wanted to take over Ukraine in a matter of days. And so they said, hey, we're going to attack from the east. Belarus, let us come from the north as well. We'll have these guys overran within 3 to 5 days. The war will be over. Well, they let them do that. And very quickly, the West got pissed off. And guess what? Poland's a Western country. Lithuania is a Western country. All these countries over here are with the West. They're NATO and all those kinds of things. Well, Belarus is incredibly reliant on Lithuania. They produce their product here in Belarus, and they would rail it through Lithuania out to their deep sea ports and out to the rest of the world. Well, Lithuania said, if you just allowed Russian troops to enter your country to attack a country that did absolutely nothing to them, you're siding with Moscow. If you're siding with Moscow, you're dead to us. And Lithuania, with a stroke of a pen, cut off those supplies. Belarus went from one of the biggest exporters in the world to next to nothing within a matter of days. Now, since that point, they've been building new infrastructure. They're sending stuff around St. Petersburg. They're sending rail stuff out to China, different places like that. They have been returning, but it's hard to get back to normal when your easiest and your cheapest supply route has been cut from you. That's a situation that's kept price a little bit higher. just because one of our bigger suppliers continues to stay missing. Obviously, like I said, I haven't had a chance to update this. There is a trade war. We do have tariffs. Now, the unfortunate part is, like I said, 90% of our imports come from Canada. 12 and a half of the 14.9 million tons comes from Canada. But fortunately, from our perspective, a lot of our spring needs are already in place. And we've got a long time between now and next fall for either the tariff war to go away or for us to find new places. And maybe we bump up Russia. Maybe we get more from Israel. We can start looking at alternatives. I don't think we can completely offset Canada. I'm not saying that, but we can make it a little more pressure on Canada as well as this whole thing plays out. The good thing about potash is that when you look at the global market, it continues to look well supplied to oversupplied to the foreseeing the nearby future in the coming years. You got Canada with more production coming online with BHP's mine still being developed. Russia is continuing to build more. Laos is going to increase their production, and potash is already very well supplied. Even though our prices have risen here of late, globally nothing's happened. Globally, supplies are still very snug and prices are staying low and steady as a result. And frankly, that's what happens. When a market's got more than enough product around the world, it's very hard to hold any sort of a price increase. We do need to watch what these tariffs might do and how long these tariffs last. But I'm hoping that once we get past spring, we'll see this thing calm down. But the biggest thing I can tell you guys is when you look at this fertilizer, and I understand how angry and anxious and everything else people get. Guys, volatility is going to be the only constant in this world. And we are absolutely a part of a world market when it comes to fertilizer. And that's why we can't sit on these opportunities. If we see an opportunity that we think is good, whether it be because we're buying the fertilizer, because it's selling the grain, whatever it is, the market is moving every second of every single day. And we are not bigger than the market. We are a part of it as much as everybody else is. So jump on those opportunities when you have a chance, but keep an eye out, keep your eyes on the world because they're going to keep changing. But that's it. A lot of stuff in a short amount of time.
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and just a reminder as we jump into those that if you have a question, you can type it in there at any time. So we have a couple of questions about Morocco and phosphate imports. So one of those questions is if there's any way to turn those imports back on.
Yes. If the Trump administration were to get rid of those, if he could do an executive order, which I don't know if he can or not. Unfortunately, I found a lawyer who was really good at these tariffs and things like that in Washington, D.C., and he was willing to do a project to kind of explain what could and couldn't happen. The problem is his rate was about $3,000 an hour. I'm in fertilizer and I don't make $3,000 an hour. But if we were to get rid of the duty completely, I think Morocco would be willing to come back day one. They want to come back. They want the U.S. market. Look at where they sit versus us. But as long as there's any sort of a duty rate, they've got plenty of demand around the world. Even when that rate was like 2.4%, they were just sitting there saying, screw you guys. I'm not paying a single duty just out of spite, out of just respect for myself. And they did. They've developed all these relationships around the world and they've shipped it elsewhere. They don't need the US market as much as the US market needs Morocco.
So another sort of question about the flow of trade. Doug said that fertilizer imports from Mexico have decreased because of the tariffs, and that Mexico has picked up their sales to the U.S. So he wants to know how much have fertilizer imports from Morocco increased to Mexico, and are they making money sort of as a middleman blending that supply?
That is a really good question. If you give me half a second actually here, I can look at my trade book and see. Exports. Well, I'll tell you what, can I do this? Well, hold on a second. So when we look at Morocco's market share in 2023 for exports, Brazil, India, Argentina, Bangladesh, Canada, Turkey, Pakistan, and then other. So just to put Mexico in relation, they're just not as big. And frankly, I'll put it this way. I don't spend a lot of time looking at Mexico because they're just not as big a market as other places around the world. They don't move the needle enough to keep a daily watch on them.
Okay. And then we have two questions about Michigan's supply of potash and, the potential for new mines and the impact on that potash market. Are you watching that, or what can you say about that?
Very much. So there was a big government grant or loan or whatever you want to call it to develop the mines. They're going to start ramping up the Michigan Potash Company, I think is the name of it. I'm going off memory there, but listen, on the surface of it, I was uh, flabbergasted that that's what we put our fertilizer money into. Because when you look at it, global fertilizers or potash supplies are sufficient. They're good. They're almost oversupplied. And so we're taking this money that could have gone to increase Florida production. It could have gone to increasing nitrogen production, and we put it into the cheapest one and the most well supplied one. So for on the surface, that's a little bit, bang your head on the table like, why in God's name would we do that? But I'm also very quick to sit there and say, this is great for Michigan. This is great for areas around Michigan because now all of a sudden that does increase that supply. That does give you a little bit more of a guarantee. So you're not as reliant on Canada and other places. That helps lower your price there domestically or nearby because you don't have to pay as much logistics. So there's two ways of looking at it, right? There's the world way of looking at it and saying this means absolutely nothing. There's better places to put our money. But thank goodness for Michigan people because the Michigan farmers are really going to benefit from this situation. So I got to play both sides of the coin there. But yeah, it looks like they're going to proceed. They're going to get this mine operational. Like I said, the fact that they couldn't get that mine operational back in 21, 22 when prices were what, almost three times what they are today.
Mhm.
But hey, it is what it is.
Yeah. I had a question still about tariffs. In addition to what's going on with Canada and Mexico, there was the announcement that there could be some sort of reciprocal tariffs going in on everyone at the beginning of April. Are there any particular areas that you're concerned about or watching that we should keep an eye out for?
Yeah, you just got to start looking around the world to some of the bigger exporters and start figuring it out from there. I mean, nitrogen, like I said, China missing hurts significantly, but the biggest one I would say, if I were to hit one single nation, it'd be Russia. Just because they are, you look at it right now, they are our biggest supplier of urea, biggest supplier of UAN, second biggest supplier of potash, and they are big across the board of all the fertilizer products. So if we were to start putting tariffs on Russia, they are the single biggest country that I would be worried about.
Okay, well, we don't have any other questions in the Q&A box right now. We don't like to shoot the messenger here at Michigan Corn, so I just wanted to end by asking if you're optimistic or what are you optimistic and hopeful about for the future?
There are always opportunities. We see it every single year, and it may not be, the slam dunk, $8 corn and $100 fertilizers and things like that. The opportunities exist. It's a matter of our willingness to jump on those opportunities when they're there. And that's the thing we all do. I do the same thing. We get emotional about the things we're a part of. You guys you're growing corn and your blood, sweat, and tears go into it. And damn it, you should be proud of the price of that stuff that you sell. But there are opportunities out there to lock in profits. So that's the thing that excites me. When I look at like the fertilizers, potash, like I said, is very well supplied around the world. I think it's going to remain very attractive for years to come. Phosphate, our operating rates here in the U.S. are supposed to improve. Mosaic has made statements about that in their last quarterly earnings call. If we get their production back up to normal, back into the 80 percentile range versus the 58% it was Q4, that would be a big boost. Not this, it's not going to be the silver bullet, but it's a major help. So I think there's better days coming. I don't want to say the worst is behind us, but I think we put a lot of it. We've got a couple steps on it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your insight. As a reminder to folks on the call, we have another one of these Coffee with Corn events coming up on March 20th. We'll be talking about mycotoxin management research with Dr. Marty Chilvers. There is one RUP credit available for that event. Also, keep an eye on your email. We'll be sending out the topics for our 2 April dates in the coming week. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me via email. I've also had some questions about recordings of the previous versions of this Coffee with Corn. We do have a couple of recordings. We did not record the first episode just by request of Krista because of how that tariff situation changes every 5 minutes. But I do have some recordings for our other sessions. Those will be going up on our YouTube page in the next couple of days here. You can also email me at ajenio@micorn.org if you want copies of any of those or you have any questions. So, Josh, thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.